Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Reading Partner's second installment of our Read to Succeed speaker series. My name is Prima Lasana, and I'm the proud executive director of Reading Partners New York City. I'm thrilled that you're joining us today for a conversation on representation in the media. Before we dig into this important conversation, I'd like to take a moment to discuss the critical moment that we find ourselves in for the world of education. A recent report from McKinsey & Company details that the average student in the United States will experience up to 6 months of learning loss because of COVID-19. For Black students, Latinx students, and students experiencing economic disadvantages, these rates will more than double. The ripple effect of the past year will exacerbate the existing opportunity gap and have a lifetime of impact on outcomes in education, health, and income for students in our communities. Research shows us that left unaddressed, these opportunity gaps will translate into wider achievement gaps, particularly for students of color. While all students are struggling with the pandemic, we see that those who entered with the fewest academic opportunities are going to exit with the greatest learning loss. We know that these same students are more likely to remain remote as they head into the next school year. Reading Partners will be there. Through Reading Partners Connects, Reading Partners will provide one-on-one literacy support for students whether they're at home or in school. Reading Partners empowers communities to solve this problem by engaging volunteers and school partners to provide students with one-on-one high-dosage tutoring. This year, with the launch of Reading Partners Connects, volunteers were trained and equipped to work with students for at least 1 hour a week using our evidence-based curriculum. Volunteerism and national service have always meant a great deal to me personally. After college, I decided to go to the south side of Chicago and volunteer in a public school through a year of national service. I worked in a reading and writing classroom. But the books that we read and the authors that wrote those books didn't look anything like us. We want to disrupt that cycle. And so what we're here to talk about today is the importance of representation in public schools, the representation of our identities in the books that we read and the dreams that are manifested inside of those pages. For us, as a community of people of color, it's so critical to come together and make sure that we can see ourselves in the books that we read and the ideas expressed within them. We want to make sure that it's possible for students to dream, and when they dream, they see themselves in those books. We're so excited that you've joined us today for a conversation on representation in the media. What we have for you is a panel of experts who are going to talk about what representation looks like in the media and why it's so important to our students. It's going to be a wonderful conversation, and once again, we thank you for being here with us today.
Across the country, over 60% of all students cannot read proficiently by the 4th grade. For economically disadvantaged students, that gap widens to almost 80%. Reading Partners fundamentally believes that the ability to read can transform lives and change outcomes for our children and our communities. We want every child to experience the joy and the power of becoming a lifelong reader, and that is our mission. Reading Partners has been able to reach students at school and at home thanks to the resilience of our community here in New York. Our families opened their homes to us, teachers built us into their daily schedules, also students could log on to their reading sessions twice a week. And together, we've collectively been able to give our students over 6,000 sessions here in New York this school year.
I spot a cricket in the grass.
Research shows that students who are reading proficiently by the end of 3rd grade are able to thrive academically and in all of their subjects. Reading Partners works with schools and communities to empower our students through literacy skill building. Our research-based curriculum delivered by volunteers has a positive and statistically significant impact on student reading proficiency. Reading Partners Traditional is our in-person tutoring model inside of schools. In this program, volunteers deliver one-on-one literacy instruction to students twice a week. Reading Partners Connects has effectively taken our research-based curriculum and translated it to the virtual space. Our volunteers access structured lesson plans customized by grade level that provide targeted skill instruction and offer students the opportunity for guided and independent practice of those skills.
What word is this?
Developing.
Good, developing. Great job.
We've added social and emotional learning lessons to our curriculum so that students have the opportunity to increase self-awareness and reflect on their feelings. Reading Partners is working to counteract inequity by increasing access to literacy instruction, reading materials, and diverse mentors, ensuring that students of color receive instruction and support from highly trained, caring adults of diverse backgrounds.
Have you ever seen an elephant? No.
I have one in my house.
You had an elephant in your house?
The expansive library of ebooks has also made sure that students are reading stories with diverse characters and see themselves represented as they hone their reading skills. Whether in person or virtual, our curriculum meets students where they are academically and socio-emotionally. Having access to both our in-person traditional program and our new virtual platform allows for more volunteer tutors to support student learning and progress in our communities. For students to receive individualized literacy tutoring regardless of where they are physically is a solution that will outlast COVID-19 and have a large impact on the learning opportunities of our young readers. Supporting students in their learning goals is truly a community effort. Reading Partners joins forces with volunteers, students, families, teachers, school leaders, AmeriCorps members, and many, many more. It takes a village, and we are so thankful that you have become a part of our student success.
Okay, so thank you all so much for being here. Today's conversation is really focused on the importance of inclusion and representation in the media, especially how it intertwines with education, equity, and systemic racism. And so before we jump in, would love for folks to go around and introduce yourself, name, where you are, and then answer the question, what has compelled you to do the work that you do?
Okay, I am Jordan Ifeuko. I am the New York Times Bestselling author of the RAYBEARER series, which came out last year. The sequel comes out this August. It's called Redemptor, comes out August 17th. And I do what I do because as a young Black girl who loved pretend, who loved stories, who loved West African folk tales and Japanese folk tales and, British fairy tales, I loved a genre of fantasy literature that didn't love me back. If I played pretend, if I played the princess or the adventurer, I even in my own mind as a little girl, I had to make up a backstory for why my skin was brown. Because I wasn't self-loathing enough to pretend to be like a white girl or anything, but I still knew that I didn't belong in this place of adventure and intrigue because I'd never read that. If I wanted to read a story about a girl who looked like me on the cover, she was a slave, or she was, it was one of those coming of age triumphal stories about a girl from the projects whose parents were on drugs. And, she's just and those stories are still necessary because they reflect things that actually happened and currently happen. But it's that danger of a single story, right? So I started writing RAYBEARER when I was 13, finished it in my 20s. And yeah, it's about an empire in which skin color is, it matters, but the most powerful people actually have very dark skin. It's loosely based on the Yoruba Empire. So I wanted to write a story where a Black girl's struggles came not from physical or sexual abuse, but from her own conflict about how to use her power and find her identity that way. So that's one major reason why I do what I do.
Jordan, that's wonderful. As a Nigerian, as a Yoruba Nigerian woman, American Nigerian woman, this is dope. I feel like you might be, writing about me or some of my people. So I love that. Thank you so much. So excited about that. Thank you so much, Jordan. Would love to hear from you, Doyin. Would love to have you introduce yourself and answer the question, what has compelled you to do the work that you do?
Yeah, so my name is Doyin Richards, and wow, I live in Los Angeles. So my work is, besides being an author, I'm a TED Talk speaker, and I am an anti-racism facilitator. And as y'all know, business is good right now. I'm just saying. So what compels me to do this work is I have two little girls who's 7 and 10, and my wife is part Japanese. So my kids have to deal with anti-Black racism, anti-Asian racism, and trying to wrap their head around how someone who looks like me could potentially attack someone who looks like their grandmother, how people who look like me, who's darker than obviously my two daughters, might be afraid going out walking at night, or just making sure that I'm dressed in my non-threatening Black man costume when I go out to places where I may not fit in, so to speak. My neighborhood being one of those places because I'm literally the only Black person on my street. So I do it because I don't want my daughters to deal with the same level of heartache, pain that I've dealt with growing up. And it's a lot of work. It feels like I'm emptying the ocean with a spoon, or attempting to empty the ocean with a spoon as far as the metaphor is concerned. But I still show up, and I do it for my kids, your kids, and for everyone who wants to have a more equitable world.
Doyin, I appreciate that so much, especially your metaphor around emptying the ocean with a spoon. Wow. So powerful. And I also want to apologize. I mispronounced your name, and I want to honor your name. And that's, so I apologize openly.
All good. Awesome. Good.
Awesome. Thank you. And so excited to have you here today, engaged in the conversation. Finally, but last but not least, Cleo. I said that properly, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. Would love to have you introduce yourself and answer the question, what has compelled you to do the work that you do?
My name is Cleo Wade. I am currently in Los Angeles. I'm a poet and an author. I think, it's interesting because when someone says, why do you do the work you do? You also have to reflect on the work you do. And most people who are writing books are story collectors, putting things into a certain format, right? And so I think that for me, I'd say that what is behind my work, the format it comes out is probably in books, but I'd say what's behind it is probably all of the times I was silenced or silent. So for me, being often the only young Black girl in a room growing up in the South, you hear things and you see things, and you're not really sure who to tell or how to tell, whether it's something racist or bigoted or derogatory that someone says, sometimes you're not even sure how to tell your own parents because they don't understand how to deal with your singular experience. Because for a lot of our parents, my dad doesn't know as much what it's like to be the only Black person in the room because he was brought up in mostly Black rooms. And so, to survive those spaces, you want to speak up, but who do you speak up to? It's kind of like in our media right now when we say, this is the time to be heard and be seen. And I always say, well, okay, but who's going to be doing the listening and the seeing? And that is also important. And so for me, I think that I work to speak up and encourage others to speak up and tell their stories, no matter how big or small they may be, whether they're their stories of joy or trauma. I work to, because I know the joy and beauty and liberation of living with your stories outside of you. And I know the sadness and despair of having them trapped within you. So that is what I do and why I do what I do.
Wonderful, Cleo. Such an honor to have you, and also super excited to hear a bit more about your new book, What the Road Said. Looking forward to getting a bit of your perspective there and into the conversation. And thank you all so much for just engaging in the introduction. I want to quickly introduce myself. I'm always so much more interested in hearing from our panelists than introducing myself. Who am I? But my name is Shakura Adamafani, and I am the executive director for Reading Partners in DC, but have agreed to sort of lead this conversation with you all just because I'm fascinated by this topic and just super excited to engage with you all when I was tasked with this. And so very excited about that. And what brought me to Reading Partners was actually really connected to all the parts of what you all just shared. But I would say that my personal life's mission is to ensure that all children have access to every opportunity that they need, every tool that they need to choose the life that they want. So to sort of take it back a little bit, going back into your early experiences, your formative years, just curious to know, what would you say, or how would you describe your own experience with representation in the media while growing up? What did you see? What didn't you see? And how did that influence your worldview today? And anyone can take that.
I learned very early that if I was to be a visible Black girl in any media, I needed to be about 3 shades lighter. I needed to have like a looser curl pattern. And if anyone was dark-skinned, they would be a sidekick. They would be, the best friend to the white lead. They would be the sister with a lot of attitude to the more light-skinned, more palatable Black sister. I think my parents did a fairly good job of making sure I didn't grow up with self-loathing, but there's only so much you can do. Like the world will tell you how it sees you from a very young age. And so I knew that if I wanted all the parts of me that I knew to be true to exist in a place, I would have to make it up. Like, I don't think I would have put it that way as a kid or even as a teenager, but it's something I knew. That's why I actually discovered fan fiction communities and stuff fairly early. And I've noticed that's a pretty common experience with Black girls who are into speculative things like science fiction and fantasy, is that it seems like a space where we're allowed to maybe be the things that we know we are, but don't have representation in media. I think that I tried to succumb to what I was expected to be from media. Like, there was a phase of life where I tried to be kind of a no crap, finger snapping attitude kind of Black girl, because that's the kind that it seemed like I was supposed to be. I'm not. I'm like an LA, California princess. And I'm also, descended from a long line of West African academics. So the nerddom is strong in my family, and so those were very formative experiences for me.
Well, Jordan, it's really interesting because, I also have West African roots, as we discussed off camera. And when I was growing up, I grew up in a Western Massachusetts town where there weren't very many people who looked like me. And even when I turned on the TV or looked in the newspaper or what have you, people who look like me, if they're doing anything that was good, they're either slam dunking a basketball, they're singing a song, or they're dancing, or telling a joke. And that's the thing, when I train people for an anti-racism, especially kids, I always tell parents, look, if you want to create an equitable world out there, you need to stop introducing your kids only to Black people who are slam dunking a basketball, singing a song they like, and all that stuff. Introduce them to Black people who are using their minds, like all of us, who are here as authors and as leading organizations and doing things that just show like, hey, it's possible for us. Because when I grew up, outside of my dad, who was a professor and a PhD, he was a unicorn to me. It was like, I didn't see anyone who looked like my dad out there. And one sad thing I'll say real quick is when I did a speaking engagement before the pandemic at an elementary school, there was like a bunch of 9-year-old kids. One 8-year-old boy, I'll never forget this, came up to me, and it was the saddest thing. He's like, hey, Mr. Richards, I didn't know that people who look like us were allowed to be authors. Allowed. So, I mean, this is 2019. So it just shows how much work we have to do. I mean, we feel like we've come a long way, but we have a lot of work to do.
Wow. I am sitting with that, allowed. I didn't know we were allowed to be authors. Wow. Cleo, I want to get you in here where I just sit with that all the rest of our time together, but would love to get your thoughts on this question as well.
What is beautiful about what's infiltrating our culture right now is this idea to be intentional with how we, raise our kids with everything they see from the moment they're born and until they leave the nest. And so whether that's the different types of books they have, I think my parents just got Dr. Seuss or got this or got that. And these things were just in the house, whether it was because they were gifts or that's what the librarian recommended. And there wasn't this kind of intentional space of even having the first books that your child reads have characters that look like them or characters that don't look like them, which is also important, And so, my daughter is very light skinned, but, majority of her books are dark-skinned figures, and that's her preference, when she goes to get her books. And so you do see how early on, if she would have probably, or any child would have only had main characters or dolls that were blonde and blue-eyed, that is where the preference is. My daughter wants to read Vashti's books and wants to see those figures, and she wants to read, she's 1.5 and her favorite book is Undefeated because in Kwame Alexander's books, the illustrations are so remarkable.
Love that and really appreciate that. And my daughter is 1.5 and recently just did a sort of inventory of what she's reading and who she sees when she's reading. And I definitely can relate to ensuring that there are varied perspectives. I sort of swayed on one side where a lot of her books are of characters who represent and look like her and who are especially from traditional African backgrounds. And so I'm like, I gotta diversify, wanting to make sure that there's balance, but also so that she can find herself in what she reads every day. And so my next question is, especially now as the media has really gone on to focus significantly on lifting the voices of folk of color and representation for that matter. Really curious to get your thoughts on how do you see representation relate to racism and white saviorism, particularly when white individuals step into communities of color to try and portray their stories in the media?
Yeah, Cleo's here, she's 7 months pregnant. And if Cleo, I'm just asking you a question. So let's say I had a class and that's just Doyin's class on childbirth. I'm going to tell you exactly what it feels like. I'm going to tell you exactly what you're going to go through. I'm going to tell you what the contractions feel like. I'm going to tell you what the kicks feel like. Everything. Would you sign up for my class?
No, I would not.
Exactly. You would not. That's kind of what I talk about when it comes to white people in this space of racism. I am one of those people. I know there's plenty of academics in the anti-racism field who feel differently. I get that when it comes to what racism is. I am of the belief that people of color cannot be racist towards white people in America. That's my take. I do not believe that. I do believe that, I should say. I believe that because I believe racism is a power construct. There's no place in America where people of color have power over white people. It's that simple. That's why I think racism, I think reverse racism and a $3 bill have the same thing in common. They don't exist. And my thing is, I don't know if I would want a white person teaching me about being anti-racist. Now, there are some good ones out there, you know who they are, but at the end of the day, it's the lived experience of what that feels like in your gut and how it feels to be shunned. I mean, from the book world, I'll give you a quick example. When my very first book, which is up there on the wall, the yellow one, I was putting out book proposals and all that stuff and trying to get a literary agent at the time. And a New York City literary agent told me via email, like, hey man, no offense, but no one wants to read a book about fatherhood from a Black man. And I was like, oh, it's like that. So at that point, what do? Do you quit? And I'm the kind of guy, I was like, you tell me no, that's fuel to the fire. So I kept going. Obviously, I got the book out there. But part of it is that lived experience, that pain of being told that I'm a damn good writer, and someone told me that no one wants to read what I have to say just because of the color of my skin. I don't know if a white person could truly understand that level of pain and disrespect. So that's kind of where I'm getting at, is I feel like there's people who want to help. And when it comes to white saviorism, I call it like Captain Caucasian, like the superhero that puts on their cape and they put on their Birkenstocks and they listen to their Dave Matthews Band while drinking their double decaf vanilla latte and getting in their Volvo and driving. Get behind me, colored people. I'm going to save the day. So that ain't it, y'all. That ain't it. I mean, using a Hollywood analogy, since the three of us live in Los Angeles, it's like this. If you want to help people of color as a white person, using a Hollywood analogy, Captain Caucasian or a white savior wants to be the star of the movie. Whereas a person who wants to be an ally, or as I call them, allies in training, because I don't feel that there's such thing as an ally. I feel like we're always in training to become one, is that person wants to be a supporting actor. It's not about them. It's not about you. It's not about you if you're going to be part of this anti-racism fight. And that's what I tell people, white people who want to get into this work, is that it's not about you. And that's part of the reason in the education process around it. But as I mentioned before, there's a lot of work to be done.
Wow.
I wanted to just hop on that because I completely agree. And so much of the time when I, speak at schools or, talk to young people, I always remind them that, this is a time where there's this one thing you keep hearing, which is like, what are you going to do? And what are you going to do? And what are you going to do? And I always pause and remind them to also ask, what am I not going to do? And what am I not going to do is as powerful as what am I going to do? Because what am I not going to do? I am not going to take up space where I have maybe historically taken up space, but don't need to take up space. I am not going to center myself in a conversation where my experience is not what we are talking about. And so, I think that, for me, when it comes to those things, whenever you talk to someone about white savior complex or whatever it may be, I'm just like, just don't. It's so easy to not, and not is part of the work, because giving that space is part of the work. And by the way, it feels uncomfortable to give that space sometimes. Do you know what I mean? And so and you can sometimes just say to someone, listen, like, I understand that I take up this much space in the world. I'm actually used to taking up space here too. And though I feel like maybe I do have the right to, perhaps, right? Because I have a story to tell too, or but like part of creating equity, you do have to loosen your attachment to what you think belongs to you. And if you can't do that, then equity and equality are not possible. No matter how much you think you're going to do, you're actually just taking up more and more and more, when you need to be doing less and fall back.
Loosen your attachment to what you think belongs to you.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, Jordan, go ahead. I have so many follow-up questions, but that, woo!
I agree completely with both of y'all. I think the only caveat I'd add is that I am 100% for white people going to get their own people. You know, like if it's a room full of white people and you know anti-racist stuff, you feel free to do that emotional labor of telling your family, your own colleagues, your own, because like it's one thing for a white person to teach a Black person about an experience they don't know anything about, but I openly encourage my white colleagues and friends, like, feel free, don't think like, oh, you know, I should bring in a Black person to tell my family how they're being racist. I'm just like, no, you have all access to all the resources, please do that work. Great for you to do that work. Your own education should come from resources by people of color and things like that. But in terms of boots on the ground, like I have seen it almost be a bit of a cop-out. Like, oh, well, I don't feel qualified, you know, to like call out my friends on this issue. Or, you know, like Jordan, like, I wish you had been there to tell them how crazy what they said was. And I'm just like, why didn't you say anything? Like, you can, you know, right? So I can see how that messaging can be a little complicated, where it's just like, oh, you know, I'm just going to pass the mic on to a Black person. But at the same time, it's just like, you know, you can be doing that work. As long as you're not speaking over a Black person, please do go get your people. You know, go after them, rein them in, tell them, you know, the right way to be, the right way to act. Because as ideally as it would be if lots of bigoted or ignorant people would hear what they need to hear from the actual demographic they're oppressing, a lot of the time they won't change until they hear it from a white person. I've seen that both on a Black level and on a woman level. There are things that, you know, men in my family would only accept about systematic sexism after hearing it from a male feminist. Like, it's not cool. It isn't the way it should be. But I'm all about boots on the ground. Like, my end game is always improvement of the lives of the oppressed people. And if they need a little puppet that looks like them telling them, you know, something before they'll believe it, I'm for using that. I'm for using all the resources we have to affect as much change as possible, is the only caveat I would add. I will answer the question a bit from a reverse perspective of when you have Black writers writing Black experiences, but the gatekeepers still think those stories are for white children. Like, a lot of the time, some of the books that get popularized and signed the quickest are issue books. So, and these are fabulous books, by the way. Their authors are my friends. I love them. They're great. They're wonderful. But like Dear Martin and The Hate You Give, revolutionary books, changed young adult fiction. But at the same time, I think one of the reasons why it's easier for those books to get signed, it's not easy for them to get signed, but easier than say, hey, this is a book just about, you know, an empire in which the Black people are in power, you know, and stuff like that, is because I still think of the majority white publishing industry sees these books as a way to improve white children. You know, I can give this book to a white child and they'll learn about racism and the Black experience. And while that isn't the same thing as a white person writing a Black experience, it still is confining to Black writers. It's just like, you don't want to other yourself in your own writing. Like, oh, I'm going to write about this Black thing, but I feel pressure to explain it a little more so that all my white readers understand what's going on. And it's a weird tightrope to walk, because you want stories to be accessible, period, but you also don't want to make the narrator other themselves, you know, by assuming that this, because if it was an all Black audience, or at least all Black audience from certain kinds of communities, you would need to explain that, right? Things like why, you know, the main character, even in this fantasy novel, wraps her hair in a satin bonnet before she goes to bed, and certain Yoruba words and things like that. So I think that's definitely one white saviory thing that still influences fiction, even when the author is a person of color?
I think you all have illustrated sort of the other part to when we think about racial equity, diversity, and inclusion work at Reading Partners. We refer to it as READY, anti-racist work. Oftentimes what is left off the table, what we don't even get a chance to talk about, is the healing portion of it. And Cleo, to your point, sort of loosening your grip on the thing that you think you have a right to. I see it in both ways, right? For white folk, it is sort of centering your experiences and your stories, and sort of painting your self picture as like, oh, well, I'm not like that. I'm this way, and these are my challenges and struggles. But also for folks of color, not doing the emotional labor. It is actually not yours to own. When it comes to experiencing or sharing life experiences. And so we don't talk about sort of the healing portion of the work and understanding what your role is and being comfortable moving within the space as you need to. One question that has really popped up in my mind as I think about our work as Reading Partners, in that we partner with our schools and work with young people by training volunteers to come into the space, would just really be curious to get your thoughts on, as we work with volunteers and they're coming into the space, and not all of them share identity with our students. If you could offer a word of encouragement or sort of an idea to volunteers on how to conduct themselves in the space along the line of not centering yourself or, not leaning into for some white saviorism, what would you offer? What would you say in terms of having people really walk that out, being, Doyin, as you said, truly being an ally?
I would tell them the same thing that I said coming on here, is that you got to make sure that you give people like us a voice. You have to, don't talk over us. And I said to myself, because sometimes I can be really chatty and talkative, I said, Doyin, you're not going to talk over a Black woman today. You're not going to do it. And I never, because listen, I don't got to be a Black woman to know that the three of you have been talked over your entire life. And your words are valuable, your input is valuable, your stories are valuable, and they matter. And I am not going to be that person. So what I always tell people in these situations is, again, not to center yourself, but also just ask questions to these kids. Like, learn, be more of a listener or an interviewer than just a talker, or waiting for them to finish talking so you can get your point in. Listen to these kids. You may learn something, and that will make you a better ally going down the road. But I feel like there's not enough of that. People want to say, hey, you know what, Tyrone, the reason why you're not successful is because of X, Y, and Z. And Preston's going to list all these reasons why he thinks that Tyrone's not good. But Preston doesn't know. You don't know. So it's like, why don't you listen and learn these things? So that's my thing. Listen more, talk less.
And I would just add that, these kids are not here to make you feel better about you. And so I think that, remember that in how you engage. So even when you ask questions, when you can be like, I'm just going to go ahead and ask questions. But when you ask questions with entitlement, that doesn't work. You can go in and want to be the listener, but are you present, or are you just being quiet? Someone can feel when you are not truly engaged with them, and people feel when you are not curious. So you can sit there and listen, but listening without curiosity means nothing. And so, I do think that it's so important for kids, whether they're the kids you're raising, the kids you're spending time with in your community, they are not there for you. You are there for them. And I think, act accordingly.
I love everything you said, both of y'all, but also just, I love how you put that. I'm putting it, I guess, just in a different way, is to make sure that you do not see people from marginalized communities as tools for your own self-development. Like the first step, and it's, cool, you took the first step of wanting to be a better person, but the end prize is not that you get to be a better person. The end prize is that the world is getting a step closer to what it should have been in the first place. It's not, they're not tools to you becoming a better person, even if that is one of the results, and that's great. You need to be doing this for the world that you want to see, the world that should be. I think also that it's a little weird because I don't want to encourage people from non-marginalized communities to do things necessarily for, their own benefit. I think that's the wrong mindset to take. But one thing I do remind them is that, like, the end result of this, of even just broadening your mind, going and consuming stories about places and people and marginalizations that you don't belong to, is that you get more stories. And that's awesome. Like, there is a personal benefit to doing this that is not just so you'll know stuff and you won't get in trouble for saying the wrong thing, which is, not a good motivation. It's like, do you know how many stories you're missing out on? Like, there is a treasure trove of imagination and perspective and corners of the world through storytelling and lenses that you are missing out on. And even if tomorrow systematic oppression was gone, and so you didn't need to educate yourself because the world is already the way it should be, you would be missing out on so much if you only stayed within your own comfort zones and, cultural background and things like that. You are doing a benefit to yourself. You're not doing a favor to us. This is a benefit to you in so many ways. And you need to remember that you're doing yourself a favor. You're not doing this as a favor to me or to, enrich my life, because you're so generous and stuff like that. You're bringing the world back to where it should have been in the first place. And also you are enriching yourself. And you need to, approach those experiences when people from marginalized communities do give that to you with gratitude, because they're giving you something special and valuable. I will say that I also say that to people who look like me because, as a I guess not necessarily people who look like me, but people who come from my particular background. Within West Africa, there is, there tends to be a lot of conservatism about certain things like sexuality and gender roles and things like that. And just also saying, like, you are missing out on so much. You are looking at half the sky, and once you give yourself the gift of, other people's narratives of other sexualities and other, non-misogyny, like, you will be a happier person and you will getting the world back to where it should have been in the first place. So,
Jordan, I think you speak to, in my previous life, I was an organizer and had the privilege to be trained by folks who've been organizing for decades. And one of the tools that they trained me on was the power of individual meetings and sharing stories as a tool to increase self-interest, right? Mm-hmm. When you hear the perspective of another, you, by virtue of engaging and being present and being curious, you then expand your self-interest, which allows you to work with a broader group of people towards equity, right? Mm-hmm. And creating the world as it should be. Mm-hmm. Right? The world that we see. So I appreciate that. You definitely are speaking to my organizing tentacles there. But I think if I were to tap into some of my Clubhouse lingo, the gems that you all just dropped is really, really important. And I just want to make sure I summarize that for folks out there listening. We want our volunteers to be curious, get curious about the young people that you're working with. We want folks to be present. Take in this moment, take in the opportunity that you have to work with the young person. And the last, I think I would summarize, Jordan, your point, and you push me here if that's wrong, be open, right? Be open to new experiences, new stories, but also being open to the fact that it's not about you and your happiness, but rather it's about supporting this young person towards their own journey. And so as we have reached time, and I can't believe it, just have one closing question for you all. As if we were appealing to the media industry and pushing them, compelling them to be different and do things different. What was your last piece of advice to those in your industry, those who are aspiring to be in your industry, around the importance of their voice in this space?
Something I've often said is that activism is organized storytelling. And so I think that, in whatever field you're in, create spaces for storytelling, whether that's through a book or around your local watering hole at work, at the, it's so important to, create these kind of sacred spaces and listening spaces and intentional spaces so that our stories have, room to grow into something and turn into something. Because, as we all know from our various work, you cannot change laws, policies, hearts or minds without having a story first. We know that. We know that from every movement that has ever happened. We know that whether it be from Rosa Parks or John Lewis, we know that all change starts with a story. And so whether it is in your corporate job or at your school, find a community and create a community around people being able to share their stories.
And with that, thank you, Doyin, Jordan, Cleo, for your wisdom, your passion, your commitment to this work. At Reading Partners, race, equity, diversity, and inclusion and representation is really critical and important to us. And we are working really hard to ensure that we are recruiting our tutors who share experience, identity, and background with the students that we work with. We are really working hard to ensure our texts are diverse and that our read-aloud libraries have all of the books that would be representative of the young people we have the privilege to work with. And as an organization, we are continuing to develop our racial equity lens to ensure that we continue doing. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
My name is Alani.
My name is Jaden.
My name is Jaylee. I'm Naomi.
My name is Kobe. I'm in 4th grade.
My name is Alexander. My name is Eiley, and I am in Reading Partners. When I was in Reading Partners, that's when I started learning how to read.
I was bad at reading at first.
It's kind of hard at the beginning, but then if you practice and practice, you'll get it. Sometimes I just need a little bit help to get it right, and then I feel proud of myself.
The tutors are great and fun, and they help you learn new words.
They help me sound it out.
My tutor's name is Kendi. My tutor is Catherine.
My tutor's names are Haley and Gabby. She is really, really funny and really, really kind.
She's like a kind person who could explain the words and help me imagine the book. Sometimes when I read a book, it's like I imagine myself into it.
I feel like I'm inside a different dimension, in a different settings, in the character's head.
And then when I read, I also pick up some vocabulary words.
It helps me learn these new words that I never ever heard before.
That there's words that are really big, so I have to break it apart.
I sound out the words, chunk them out, and then I say them little by little.
Reading is important because you learn new things. Reading partners actually helps me a lot.
The reason why I like reading partner is because we do fun activities and read good books.
It feels to me like I'm having the best experience I ever had.
Thank you for joining us this morning as we celebrate the diversity of the students in our program. Media is such an important outlet for our students to see themselves represented in books, movies, television, and the texts that they're reading every day with their Reading Partners volunteers. This conversation is critical to moving forward as a collective of people of color. And I want to thank our board of directors, our sponsors, and every single person who joined us here today to engage in this conversation and move this work forward. If you are inspired by the magic and innovation of Reading Partners, we hope that you'll make a donation to Reading Partners New York City. What we're entering is a critical year for students, educators, and communities to emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic stronger and more resilient and more empowered than ever before. For the communities of color that we serve, literacy is such a critical tool to make sure that they live a lifetime of success. There are so many different ways to donate to Reading Partners New York City. In the chat, you'll find a link to our website. You can also mail a check directly to our organization, or you can scan a QR code off the screen that's available right now. The support that you give to our organization will have a critical impact during a critical year. Thank you for being here and for believing in the boundless opportunities that our students have, and for the volunteers who give their time to make sure that our students are successful. Thank you for joining us at Reading Partners, and thank you for being a part of our community.